So as a last hurrah with the most difficult task ahead of him, Brian McGrath. I'll introduce you, Brian, and there you go. Brian McGrath is Research Chair in Urban Design at the School of Constructed Environments at Parsons. He's the founder and principal of Urban Interface LLC, an urban design consultancy fusing expertise in architecture, ecology, and social media. A selection of his books include the Urban Design Ecologies Reader, Digital Modeling for Urban Design, Growing Cities in a Shrinking World, The Challenges in India and China, co-edited with Ashok Gurung and Jianying Jha, Sensing the 21st Century, co-edited by Graham Shane, and Cinemetrics Architectural Drawing Today, co-authored with Jean Gardner. He served as a Fulbright Senior Scholar in Thailand in 1998-99 and has continued to work in Thailand since, and was an India-China Institute Fellow in 2006-2008. So he's going, actually, we asked Brian to do one of the most difficult tasks, which is to sort of synthesize, not into a hybrid, but keeping track of the various threads to sort of bring some of the provocations and conversations that have taken place and sort of thread them together in the context of his own work. So I suspect we will all be in Bangkok, but we'll somehow hear ourselves echoed and ricocheted. Thanks, Brian.
So I just put together 3 lectures that I have, lots of slides, and but I organized it in a way to absorb the 4 conversations. So I have 4 sections for the 4 conversations. And, but I wanted to start with the idea of emergence. It's not in the title of the book we're all indebted to and are here today for, but emerging. But I was interested in looking at Bangkok at this present moment, which is undergoing yet another incredible boom. It was just listed as the 5th fastest growing city in the world, approaching 15 million people. And in contrast to Manila or Jakarta or Lagos, Dhaka, Karachi, the other fastest growing cities, it's not through natural population growth. They have Buddhist planned culture. It's not a Catholic country. Just referring to Lucille's interesting demographic observation about the Philippines. I think I'd like to explain that, but I wanted to start because of the trajectory of the book with that this incredible emergence, re-emergence, and another emergence today, in spite of some incredible recent catastrophes. So you'll see some images from, so one of the lectures is about the 2010 red shirt occupation of the city, and then the 2011 worst floods in the history of a water-prone country. Yet in 2012, it's one of the 5 fastest growing cities in the world. So somehow I believe that that's the destiny of Bangkok. And I want to speak a little bit about that. So here's our schema, and I think I have 5 minutes each. So if you could even tell me when my 5 minutes are up, I can go through these 4 sections, 5 minutes each. So Ratchadamnoen is the island fortress city that is the origins of Bangkok, the feudal city. And I want to talk a little bit about Robert and Radhika's cultural constructs around the body. And Ratchadamnoen is, of course, a city constructed around the body of the king. Ratchadamnoen is the royal walk. That's translated from Thai, means the royal walk. And that's where the body of king is taken out of the inner sanctum of the Grand Palace and is placed in a promenade after the king visits the colonies and visits Europe. And so the self-colonizing moment is about the body of the king being exposed and being mobile in the city and the architecture that's created around that. Ratchaprasong is the central shopping district of Bangkok and also an incredible fashion ecology. I don't know if you've ever been there, Christina, but I'd love to take you on a tour. Certainly the Dean of Fashion has been there a few times, and I enjoy talking to Simon about Bangkok. And Suvarnabhumi is, of course, Ratchadamnoen, the self-colonization is where I refer to Aseem and Arthur. This sometimes called semi-colonization or crypto-colonization is how people try to describe what happened in Thailand, because it was not colonized by European powers, but has had incredible strong influences from especially Japan and US in its recent history. And then Ratchaprasong is when I want to talk a little bit about the vertical and horizontal city, because it is a horizontal space that's sitting in the middle of what's becoming a cluster of towers in the center of the city. And so that's where I speak to Jeff and Lucille's project. And Suvarnabhumi is, of course, the Golden Land. That's what the South Asians called Southeast Asia, but it's also the name that the King of Thailand gave to the new international airport. And so I want to speculate about why that name was invoked, a transnational name. It's not a national name. It's not a national airport. And so that speaks to the manifest destiny and aspirations of Bangkok as being the capital of Suvarnabhumi, not of Thailand. So the destiny is in the name. So Bangkok is a local common name for Krongthep, Pramahanakorn, Amorn, Ratakanakosindra, Mahindra, Udaya, Maha Dilokpop, Noparantana, Radhani, Buriram, Udan, Rachnivet, Mahasatan, Amorn, Piman, Avatarn, Satit, Aka Atuyaya, Vishnu Karn Prasit. And you can read the translation of all the adulations of the city. It's much more than a metropolis. It is a familiar diagram, not only in Indonesia, but the same Mount Meru Indic cosmology is how the vertical and the horizontal is organized in Bangkok. And so the king, of course, is responsible for keeping in order these three worlds. Tripum means the three worlds, of the world of form and sensation, where we all live, the world of form without sensation, where you reach a higher level, and then the world beyond form and sensation, which, of course, the king has contact to and tries to keep everything moving around that cosmology. So this is Ratanakosin, and the Grand Palace is the blank white space in the middle. Of course, an absence center, much like in Edo and at the center of Tokyo. And I'm going to have to move really fast. I can't give you the history of this. So this is just visual delight. And of course, it's war. So this is a feudal city. It's built. It's the diagram of the city. It's a fortified city. The king's at the center. The front palace is in the front. The rear palace is in the rear, with the front army and the rear army. And that is not an original river. It's a canal that's cut to make this kind of bow form. And it's three concentric islands that constitute the royal Ratanakosin center of Bangkok. And the royal barges are warships. They have cannons at their prows, and they were taken from Ayutthaya, the former capital. And of course, the Grand Palace is also adjacent to the royal monasteries. This is Wat Po with the reclining Buddha. There's a vertical and a horizontal Buddha that you have to visit too, the standing Buddha and the reclining Buddha. So, and then the Brahmic ceremonies, it's a Buddhist king, but a Dhamma king. But the Brahmin rituals are very important in ensuring the the sacred cosmology. And make sure you tell me when my 5 minutes are up, because then I have to go to Ratchadamnoen. Sacred cosmology. So this is a floating structure that's for a tonsorial ceremony for a prince. So the city is constructed around houses. So the Grand Palace is in the center. It's the polygamous king, of course. You saw the king and I. The rest of the princes are ministering different territories and states and tributary situations and their own domestic extended households around the king. And so a prince is, when the top knot is cut, is bathed in the Chao Phraya River, and I'm going to just have to, and funerary monuments. This is the funerary monument set up in the sacred ground in front of the palace. It's not a public space. It's the sacred ground for the funeral. The Brahmin royal swing is in the center of the town. Okay, now, so that's just touching upon some of the issues of the body, and so it's a sacred body. It's not a sensate body, and the idea of the body is to get beyond sensation and to reach form. And so the form, the design, the form of the city, the form of the body, the form of the vestments, maybe not clothing, not fashion, are really extremely important beyond their sensation. Ratchadamnoen is the royal walk, and on this map in blue you can see the extension of the the oval. The ellipse is the funerary space that is extended to a much larger public space. The palace of the second king is demolished. It becomes a national museum because the king goes to London and meets the crown prince and says that's a really good idea. He builds a palace for the crown prince to the south east called Patamwan. The palace is called Windsor Palace, and that's today Chulalongkorn University, and where I'll take you on our shopping trip in Ratchaprasong. But the Ratchadamnoen is this kind of elbow in blue that goes up to Dusit, where European-style palace is built, a new viceroy palace, let's say. So, so we see the king is self-colonizing his country in a semi-way. I mean, he's still the Dhamma king. The Brahma rites are still there. The Buddhist is still central, but he's given an equestrian statue and great, wonderful, festive kinds of triumphal arches. But then in 1932, there's a kind of a palace revolt, and the absolute monarchy is replaced by a parliamentary system with the king as a figure of the state. And in 1932, you see there's influence of nationalism, fascism, in the architecture, and so Democracy Monument is created in this royal walk. The trees are torn down, and French concrete architecture is borrowed. All these guys who did the revolt were, of course, in Paris learning how to be revolutionaries and came back and overthrew the king. But this wonderful space was a Democracy Monument in name only. Very quickly, it became a military dictatorship, and it became true to its name only in 1974 when the student revolt, because this 1932 government actually established a second university, a political science university, Thammasat, and the student revolt kind of spilled over to the street. This populist military government created a flea market in that royal cremation cemetery, so there's like thousands of people for the flea market that joined the students, and so this populist revolt from 1974 was a slaughter because the army came in, and so this space becomes not only a symbol of democracy but a place of ghosts, and it's haunted, and this gets repeated again in 1996. Okay. 5 minutes, next song. Okay. Ratchaprasong. So this is where we get to shop, and so, but it's the vertical and horizontal, and so there is some reference to Christine's talk, but I was really thinking about Jeff and Lucille here. And so this is that section. So the Crown Prince died while he was a student in UK, and so his brother became king and gave the land to the university, Chulalongkorn University, where I've been happy in residence for the last 18 years, and witnessing a kind of emergence of a central shopping district along that red line, that street, which is called Rama 1 Road, between two intersections, Patumwan and Ratchaprasong intersections. And so there's a kind of history of shopping, and so it starts in 1965 with the Americans building a park and shop complex. You can diagonally park in front of the store, and it's on university land, so this is the university's endowment. There's the first bowling alleys, the first cinemas, and so it's rest and recreation for the Vietnam War in Bangkok, 1965. The first department store follows later, 1975, the first internal atrium escalators, Siam Center. Mambung Krong, MBK, is the first like internalized mall with an integrated parking deck, a hotel, and an office building. Central World, built as the World Trade Center, bankrupt in 1997 with the East Asian financial crisis. Several Amarin districts, several other shoppings that appear in the mid-90s, and Siam Paragon. So these ones in the top left of the drawing are on the property of the Crown Princess. And so again, this is a kind of equity for the good work of the princess, you know, rural development, craft projects, things like that is coming from real estate projects on land that are given to the royal family. And the property below it belongs to the university, and the property on the upper right belongs to Crown property itself. So this is not the same kind of real estate market system we have in New York, where a grid and gets divided up and people speculate. The developers get 15-year leases, and so the kind of comments that Lucille had about oh, it's cheap and short, it's sort of built into the economic structure. You have 15-year lease, you're going to build and renovate every 15 years. So there is a kind of fashion cycle to these shopping centers, and as a result, an ecosystem where young designers enter into the oldest one, Siam Center, have small shops. If they make it, they move to the air-conditioned mall across the street, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, Louis Vuitton is in Siam Paragon, which happens later. And so what happens later is the financial crisis, 1997, the introduction of mass transit, the SkyTrain and elevated system. So what's in red here is this incredible 2-kilometer long horizontal pedestrian above street level transit system that was just kind of happened accidentally over time. So this became, and so you can imagine Port Royal Walk is like the deadest, most miserable place. No one walks in Bangkok, kind of at a street like that. You walk in the mall, but you walk outside the malls. And so this became an incredible cosmopolitan space. I'd show you the video if I had time, of this interconnectedness. And so it was no accident when, and then there's a story about the internet and the cell phone coming in at the same time. So this is all these physical spaces are tied to social networks. And this is a New York story. And so these plazas, we talked about plazas, become the sites of not only cell phone use and smart mobs and social networking, but the protest when the yellow shirts decided that Thaksin Shinawatra just got too corrupt, and so they brought a collapse of the government by moving their demonstration from Democracy Monument to the shopping malls. And that caused such a threat to the economy that he resigned and dissolved parliament. The red shirts copied the yellow shirts 4 years later, and when the royalist Abbasid, Prime Minister Abbasid's government was faced with an entrenched 3-month-long occupation of the center of the city 1 year before Wall Street was occupied. Finally, and so there's a beautiful ethnographies of the sort of rural poor and the people who are servicing this new tourist and middle-class economy, the motorcycle taxi drivers, et cetera, are the kind of mobilizers of this demonstration. They own the map of the city because they're the motorcycle drivers and they know how to negotiate decent spaces. The barricades were built. The malls were burnt when the army came in and retreated. The cinema, it was quite frightening, but this is being constructed now. It took them 2 years to go on, and Future Systems is designing the most incredible shopping mall hotel complex just right there, where everything has been renovated and reopened. And tourism has surpassed any expectations, the capacity of the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. This is Mahavnakorn. Remember the royal title? Mahavnakorn is designed by OMA, and it's the tallest building, and the vertical horizontal enters in here too, because you can see it's a spiral of a kind of pixelated erosion of the modernist tower. And in their renderings, of course, the street vendors and the elephants and everyone climb up this Tower Babel and invade the Ritz-Carlton towers on the top. And so this transit system is just the beginning of this huge network, which is under construction, which will rival what happened in Shanghai for 2010 Expo, and really prove the manifest destiny of Bangkok as re-emerging as the capital of Suvarnabhumi. So Suvarnabhumi, of course, is this golden land, and this, I was lucky enough to see the construction of the airport. These super trusses, they're called, that were built on land and lifted up by these vaults within a what's called a monkey cheek. It's actually a water flood retention area to the east of the city that the king had designated as a place not to build on. So that's why they're shaped like boats, I guess. It's kind of like Noah's Ark. And that's the airport is completed. So it's Suvarnabhumi. It's the name of this golden land. The king gives it the auspicious name for this airport. It was built for 40 million passengers a year. 51 million arrived last year. They had to reopen the old airport to handle the traffic. And it's also the most Instagrammed building of 2012. And so here's, and it was a Chicago architect who designed it, there was a uproar about its lack of tightness, and so you can see the gardens start to have some elephants and other kinds of symbols of tightness. But the yellow shirts also occupied Suvarnabhumi, and so it's not only the most Instagram space, it's, I think, one of the first international airport that became a site of protest, and they closed the airport for a week. But it also contains the figurative monument of the churning of the milk, and of course I'm speechless, I can't remember the whole title of it, but this is from Angkor Wat, and this is Angkor Thom, the entrance to the city that is, in a Thai point of view, a part of Suvarnabhumi, and the bas-reliefs. And here's Bangkok Metropolitan Region, and here's the flood of 2011. So you can see the red is infrared, so it's green. It's rice paddies to the east and fruit orchards to the west. So the city sits in the most fertile of places you can imagine. And it was, the farms were completely inundated, but the city was protected. And you can see also Suvarnabhumi. So Suvarnabhumi not only has the symbolic churning of the Sea of Milk sculpture when you enter into it, it also is surrounded by 3 moats like Angkor Thom, and dikes which protected it from the flood. So it remained open, and tourists still arrived during the worst flood, and there it is. Airport still, runway still dry, but the factories, Christina, were underwater. Someone asked about climate change earlier. You can see the dust-covered Hondas outside the Honda assembly plant. A little bit about Japanese colonialism happening economically instead of politically. This is Rojana Industrial Estates, where that is, and I did a survey there watching the construction of the walls around it. and of course the most Instagram location of 2012. And also, Bangkok is the most Facebook users of any city in the world. 14.5 million Facebook users in Bangkok. So again, it's a manifest destiny, and it's using new forms of symbolism and embodied practices. And I became a Facebook friend when I taught in Thailand. I had to keep in touch with my students. It was the only way possible. So you can find me on Facebook. But this nighttime satellite imagery, I am wrapping up, gives you an idea of what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So all the black area, Cambodia to the southeast, Laos to the northeast, Myanmar to the west, is of course the remnants of the Cold War. And so, the ASEAN community, economic community, is starting in 2015. And so this is some of the infrastructure projects, a new port in Burma that will connect to India, the Singapore bypass as a logistical center. So Bangkok has its destiny as an emergent city. And there are other things I want to say, but I don't have time. But the last thing I want to say that maybe ties the body and the city is Foucault. And so the reason I look to the Destiny of Emergence is Foucault's reading on Nietzsche, who's reading on Darwin. So the genealogy of morals becomes a transformative moment from Foucault to go from, you know, the kind of history of ideas and institutions to the history of the body. And so for an emergence, you have to understand descent. Any emergence is only possible within what is already there. The capacity for an emergence has to be present in the DNA of the body or the city. So that's my last message. Thank you.
First of all, I wanted to thank several people who have contributed to the success of today's symposium, especially two who stand out. Vinayak Bharne, who, as you mentioned, he and I have talked about this, and he really put the book together for over 5 years. And if you've ever done an edited book, like I know Brian has done that, and Jeff has done that, many of you have done it. It's a huge, painful task, but it's worth it. I mean, so you need a certain amount of courage and patience. So I want to thank Vinayak for that. And I want to thank Radhika for being such an excellent co-conspirator. I really enjoy listening and learning from you. And Radhika has this unique ability to be both very expansive and very subtle about things. And it's a kind of wonderful ability. And of course, I want to thank all our speakers who are here. I also want to mention the people who work quietly behind the scenes to make these events possible. So our wonderful Director of Operations at the School of Design Strategies, Robin Campbell, Diela Lateef, who's the event coordinator for the Theories of Urban Practice program, our great student volunteers, Xavier Williams, Matt Del Sesto, Blair Lorenzo, Mariam Kabasi, Alex Rush, and others. And so I just want to kind of sort of go back to the book a little bit and talk about sort of, in a sense, what next. So in taking a broad intellectual view, the book has served as the trigger for this symposium and embraces the Asian urban landscape as a series of multifarious confluences extending from the deserts of the Persian Gulf region to the Pearl River Delta. I was talking to somebody about the book and the symposium, and I said, yeah, the way we look at Asia, it's from Tel Aviv to Vladivostok. And they're like, what? But that is Asia, you know, kind of embracing that both and aspect that Vinayak mentioned. So in the face of incredible complexities, Asian cities continue to magically thrive, and as some of the oldest cities in the world, far older than European or American cities, they constantly challenge what urbanists typically carry in the back of their minds as implicit models of what cities should be. Asian cities are founts of deep knowledge, locales for innovation and resourcefulness born out of survival, and everyday miracles of management, but most of all, sources of inspiration for future urbanisms. A critical set of questions that emerge out of the discussion in the book and the symposium are, how do we actually engage with contemporary Asian cities? That is, how do we interact and interface with these complicated entities? We engage with Asian cities through curiosity, by asking deep questions, through understanding, in other words, by conducting critical research, through establishing perspectives, for example, by framing key issues, through gaining insights, by identifying key themes, through approaches such as adopting sophisticated positions like some of the ones you heard today, and interventions by developing design strategies. Amid such multifaceted engagements over time, we also remain open enough to be challenged and changed by our understanding of them. One of the most crucial aspects of this engagement, therefore, is to recognize the various forces shaping Asian cities, from historical trends to colonial legacies to contemporary globalization, but also to realize that ultimately engagement is as much a question of human agency as it is about larger societal structures. At the end of the day, cities are created and recreated by human beings, not so much in the guise of one person's or one group's vision, but as a muddled result of multiple interventions by multiple groups. Indeed, practice in the best sense of the term is not as a master urbanist, but as one of the many actors who shape the city within sets of circumstances. As activists, authors, scholars, practitioners, we practice in all these ways by instigating questions, by highlighting thematic areas for investigation, by indulging in propository acts, whether in staking out positions or creating visions for the future. At its heart, practice is always about transformation, be it the invention of a new idea, the rekindling of a dormant circumstance, or the implementation of a project. What remains consistent in all forms of practice is that it takes responsibility for its actions and for the city. How do we do this? We do this by being informed, by being modest, by being open to these multifaceted engagements, so that they may understand their interdependence, learn from one another, and mature together through a constant nurturing process. Embracing the idea of collective engagement as somehow superior to the limitations of a single mind. The complexity of Asian cities deserves this kind of expansive, multidimensional engagement. And this eventually is what we have to set out to do, to provoke this kind of engagement and practice in the best sense of the term, to struggle with, to propose, to fall short, to learn, to try again, to fail, and continue our never-ending quest for transforming the Asian city. Thank you. So a few announcements. One is what you see behind me. Vinayak Barne, Robert Cowherd, Jeff Howe, and I have been talking for several months about making this book a beginning. And so we are putting together a collaborative called the Emerging Asian Cities Collaborative, where we want to engage and practice with Asian cities in a very different way. And it's a kind of organic process. It's not a formal entity yet. Maybe someday it will. But essentially, there are a couple of principles we are interested in. One thing I think at least the four of us share is we consider ourselves scholar practitioners. We're not one or the other, we are both. And so our research has a certain perspective to it. And I think Robert put it very well. I mean, there are excellent people out there who do fantastic research, but they're essentially what I might call professional observers who sort of publish and observe. But we are interested in doing something much more messy and complicated and, and fail. And that's practice is a big part of that, is try things out. So that kind of approach of scholar practitioner, and that informs the practice and our research. The other thing we find we have in common is when we talk about Asia, it's not this exotic other that we go over there for 3 weeks, it's really cute. I can talk about... I'm sorry, so it is cute. No, sorry, I'm just teasing. There are many examples of, just to take one stereotype, people go and like, oh my God, cool, cows in the street, take a photograph, you come back. I think we are interested in kind of more the interrelationships, and that sort of reflects in Lucille's poster, where it's New York, Bangkok, Los Angeles, Hiroshima. These kinds of investigating and having this kind of interrelational approach to Asian cities. That's the other thing we are interested in. The third thing we are interested in is we want to instigate things, whether it's research, projects. We don't want to just wait for people to come to us and say, oh, there's this grant out there you should go for, or there's this project or this community organization. We want to be quite proactive. So we've set up this website. It's obviously under construction. We can talk about this. We welcome you to join us if you share some of these ideas and some of the themes of today. And so that's one announcement, and we can talk about it. The other announcement is, of course, that also the publisher, Routledge, has been kind enough, and Laura is here with copies of the book if you want to buy them and get it signed by Vinayak or maybe anybody else. And it's at a, Laura, are you selling it at a discount? 20% off. So if anybody's interested, they've been kind enough, even though it's a Friday evening, they've come here. Anybody wants to take a look or purchase that. And then finally, maybe what we're all waiting for is a reception with some wine. And so we can continue the conversation on that. Thank you all for coming. I also want to thank our audience on the web, live streaming. And let's continue talking over some food and wine. Thank you all.
I want to do the most Instagram event on Friday night.